when desperate mother Elena Martinez offered herself to a stranger for just one night in exchange for feeding her starving daughter in 1,881 Arizona territory. She expected the worst kind of transaction. But Cowboy James McKenzie had something entirely different in mind, something that would change 3 lives forever. Will Elena discover that sometimes the most dangerous gamble isn't what you're willing to lose, but what you might actually win? A gunshot echoed through Tombstone's dusty streets as Elena Martinez pressed her back against the saloon wall, her heart pounding like thunder. The Arizona territory heat made everything shimmer, like a bad dream in the summer of 1881. But the empty feeling in her stomach was all too real. Her 5-year-old daughter Maria tugged at her faded brown skirt. "Mama, I'm hungry," the little girl whispered, her big dark eyes looking up with complete trust. Those words hit Elena harder than any bullet could. Elena knelt down and touched Maria's thin cheek. The child's face had grown so small over the past weeks. Her little dress hung loose like a sack, and Elena could count her daughter's ribs through the worn fabric. "I know, mija. Mama will find us food soon," Elena promised, though she had no idea how. Her last coin had bought them a piece of bread 3 days ago. Since then, they had survived on water from the town well, and hope that grew thinner each day. The silver mines had brought thousands of men to this desert town, all dreaming of striking it rich. But for every man who found fortune, 10 more found only empty promises and broken dreams. Elena's husband had been one of those dreamers. He had left for the mines 6 months ago, promising to return with enough silver to buy them a real house. Instead, all she got was news that a cave-in had taken his life along with 12 other miners. Now, Elena stood in the shadows of the Last Chance saloon, watching rough men stumble in and out with coins jingling in their pockets. The sound made her stomach twist with both hope and fear. She had sold everything: her wedding ring, her mother's silver cross, even the pretty blue ribbon Maria loved to wear in her hair. But it hadn't been enough. The saloon's swinging doors opened again, releasing a cloud of cigarette smoke and loud laughter into the evening air. A cowboy stepped out, different from the others. He moved with quiet confidence, his clothes dusty but clean. His hat sat properly on his head, not tilted at a careless angle like the drunk miners wore theirs. Elena watched him untie his horse from the hitching post. His hands were steady and gentle as he checked the animal's bridle. There was something about the way he treated his horse that made her think he might be different from the other men in this town. "Stay right here, Maria," Elena whispered to her daughter. "Don't move from this spot." She stepped out of the shadows, her bare feet silent on the wooden walkway. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it might burst from her chest. What she was about to do went against everything her mother had taught her about being a good woman. But good women didn't watch their children waste away from hunger. The cowboy looked up as she approached. His eyes were gray like storm clouds, and they didn't look at her with the hungry stare she expected. Instead, he seemed surprised to see her. "Excuse me, senor," Elena said, her voice shaking despite her efforts to sound brave. I have a request." He straightened up, giving her his full attention. "Ma'am?" Elena's throat felt as dry as the desert sand. She glanced back at Maria, who was peeking around the corner of the building. Her daughter's trusting face gave her the courage to continue. "My little girl hasn't eaten in 3 days," Elena said, the words coming out in a rush. I can give you 1 night, just 1 night with me, if you'll buy her a meal first. Please, senor. She's so hungry." The cowboy's face went very still. He looked from Elena to where Maria was hiding, then back again. Elena held her breath, waiting for his answer. She had prepared herself for mockery, for crude laughter, for hands that would grab at her roughly. She had not prepared herself for the gentle sadness that crossed his features. "Ma'am," he said softly, "when did you last eat?" The question caught her off guard. In all her desperate planning, she had imagined many responses, but not this one. Not concern for her, instead of interest in her offer. Elena started, then stopped. The truth was, she couldn't remember. Yesterday? The day before? Time had blurred together into one long ache of hunger and worry. The cowboy stepped closer, and Elena fought the urge to back away. But he didn't reach for her. Instead, he gestured toward the saloon. "Would you and your daughter join me for supper?" he asked. "No strings attached, just a meal between neighbors." Elena stared at him, wondering if this was some kind of trick. Men didn't offer charity without expecting something in return. Her experience had taught her that much. But Maria chose that moment to peek around the corner again, and the cowboy's face softened when he saw her. "What's your daughter's name?" he asked. "Maria," Elena whispered. "That's a pretty name." He tipped his hat slightly. "Mine's James McKenzie, and I reckon both you ladies could use a hot meal and some coffee." The smell of cooking meat drifted from the saloon, making Elena's knees weak with longing. She looked at this stranger who offered kindness instead of taking advantage, and wondered if miracles still happened in places like Tombstone. "Don't trust him, Mama," Maria whispered in Spanish, as they followed James McKenzie toward the saloon's entrance. The little girl's small hand gripped Elena's fingers tightly. "Remember what happened with Mr. Peters?" Elena's stomach clenched at the memory. 2 weeks ago, a mine foreman named Peters had promised Maria candy if Elena would wash his clothes. But when Elena finished the laundry, Peters had grabbed her wrist and tried to drag her into his shack. Only the arrival of other miners had saved her from whatever he had planned. "This is different, mija," Elena murmured back in Spanish, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. James pushed through the saloon doors, and immediately the noise hit them like a wall. Piano music mixed with shouting voices and clinking glasses. The air was thick with smoke and the smell of unwashed bodies. Several men turned to stare as Elena and Maria entered. "Well, well," called out a voice from the back corner. "Mackenzie's brought himself some company." Elena felt her cheeks burn with shame. These men would think exactly what she had offered, that she was here to sell herself. But James seemed unbothered by the comments. He found an empty table near the front window and pulled out a chair for Elena. "Don't mind them," James said quietly. "Half these fools haven't seen their own families in months. They've forgotten how decent people behave." Elena sat down carefully, smoothing her wrinkled skirt. Maria climbed onto the chair beside her, her eyes wide as she took in the rough crowd around them. The child had never been inside a saloon before. James signaled to the bartender, a large man with arms like tree trunks. "Pete, bring us 3 bowls of whatever Rosie's got cooking back there, and some milk for the little one." "Coming right up, Mackenzie," the bartender called back. While they waited, James removed his hat and set it on the empty chair beside him. His dark hair was pressed flat where the hat had been, with streaks of gray at the temples that made Elena think he was older than she had first guessed. Maybe 35 or 40. "You're not from Tombstone originally," Elena observed. His accent was different from the rough miners and gamblers who filled the town. "Montana," James replied. "Had a ranch up there with my father and brother. Cattle mostly." "What brought you to Arizona?" Elena asked, then immediately regretted the question. Personal questions might make him think she was trying to get too familiar. But James didn't seem to mind. "Looking for my sister," he said simply. "She ran off with a traveling salesman about 2 years back. Last letter I got said she was somewhere in the territory." Before Elena could respond, the bartender arrived with their food. 3 steaming bowls of beef stew with chunks of potatoes and carrots floating in rich brown gravy. Fresh bread, still warm from the oven. A tall glass of milk that made Maria's eyes go round with wonder. Elena's mouth filled with water at the smell. She hadn't seen food like this in months. But she forced herself to wait, watching as Maria picked up her spoon with trembling hands. "Go ahead, Mia," Elena whispered. "Eat." Maria took her first bite, and her face lit up like sunrise. She ate with the desperate hunger of a child who had learned not to take meals for granted. Elena felt tears prick her eyes as she watched her daughter finally getting proper food. "Aren't you going to eat?" James asked, noticing that Elena hadn't touched her bowl. The truth was, Elena felt guilty eating when she had offered to pay for this meal in such a shameful way. But her growling stomach won the battle with her pride. She took a small bite, then another, trying not to show how desperately hungry she was. "Your husband around?" James asked casually, breaking off a piece of bread. Elena's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "He died in the mines. Cave-in took him, and 11 others back in March." "I'm sorry for your loss," James said, and he sounded like he meant it. "Must be hard, raising a child alone in a place like this." "We manage," Elena said, though they both knew that wasn't entirely true. James nodded and didn't push for more details. They ate in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds coming from Maria's happy humming as she worked through her bowl of stew. "This is the best food I ever tasted," Maria announced in careful English, beaming at James. "Tell Rosie that." James smiled back. "She's the cook here. Been making stew for miners for 20 years. As they finished eating, Elena found herself studying this strange cowboy who had shown them such unexpected kindness. His clothes were worn but clean. His hands were calloused from hard work but gentle when he handed Maria a second piece of bread. Most importantly, his eyes held no hint of the hunger she had seen in other men's faces when they looked at her. "Mr. McKenzie," Elena said carefully, "I want to thank you for this meal, but I still meant what I said outside. If you want, if you need." "Ma'am," James interrupted quietly, "I appreciate the offer, but that's not why I bought you supper." Elena felt her cheeks burn again, but this time with confusion rather than shame. "Then why?" James was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup in his hands. When he finally looked up, there was something sad in his gray eyes. "Because I once had a sister who might have found herself in your situation," he said. "And I hope that if she did, some decent person would have helped her, instead of taking advantage." Outside, the first stars were beginning to appear in the purple sky. Elena looked at her daughter, whose belly was finally full for the first time in days, then back at this mysterious cowboy who had appeared like an answer to prayers she had been afraid to pray. But in her experience, kindness like this always came with a price. The question was, what would James McKenzie's price turn out to be? "You're making a mistake, McKenzie." Sheriff William Crenshaw's voice boomed across the dusty street as James helped Elena and Maria into his wagon the next morning. "That woman's nothing but trouble." James didn't even turn around as he climbed onto the driver's seat. Elena felt every eye in Tombstone watching them as the wagon wheels began to roll. Maria sat between them, clutching the small cloth doll that James had bought her from the general store, along with new clothes and supplies. "Where are we going?" Elena asked, still unable to believe this was really happening. 3 hours ago, she had been sleeping in an alley behind the bakery. Now she sat beside a man who claimed he needed help at his ranch and was offering them honest work in exchange for a place to live. "About 5 miles north," James replied, guiding the horses around a deep rut in the road. "Got a small spread there. Nothing fancy, but the cabin's sound, and there's good water." Elena studied his profile as he drove. In the morning light, she could see the lines around his eyes that spoke of hard years and outdoor work. A thin scar ran from his left ear to his jaw, old but noticeable. Whatever had brought him to Arizona territory, it hadn't been an easy journey. "Mr. McKenzie," Elena said carefully, "I need to know what you expect from me. What kind of work?" "Cooking, mending, keeping the place clean," James said without hesitation. "Maybe help with the garden if you're willing. I can handle the horses and cattle on my own, but I'm hopeless with a needle and thread. Been living on beans and hardtack for months." It sounded too good to be true. Elena had learned to be suspicious of anything that seemed too good to be true. As they left Tombstone behind, the landscape opened up into rolling hills dotted with mesquite trees and prickly pear cactus. In the distance, purple mountains rose against the blue sky like sleeping giants. Elena had forgotten how beautiful the Arizona territory could be when you weren't desperate and starving. "Look, Mama!" Maria pointed excitedly at a roadrunner that dashed across their path. "A funny bird." "That's a roadrunner," James told her. "They're faster than most horses when they want to be." Maria giggled, the sound making Elena's heart both lighter and heavier at the same time. Her daughter was acting like a normal child for the first time in months, but Elena knew how quickly things could change. How quickly kindness could turn into something else entirely. The ranch appeared around a bend in the road, a modest wooden house with a covered porch, a barn that had seen better days, and corrals that held about 20 horses. Smoke drifted from the chimney, which puzzled Elena since James had been in town. "Someone's here," she said, instinctively moving closer to Maria. James frowned. "That would be my partner, Buck Collins. Told him I'd be back yesterday." He pulled the wagon up to the front porch. "Buck, come on out here." The front door opened, and a man appeared who was the exact opposite of James in every way. Where James was tall and lean, Buck was short and round. Where James moved with quiet grace, Buck stumbled slightly as he stepped onto the porch. Where James spoke in measured tones, Buck's voice boomed across the yard. "Well, I'll be damned. McKenzie, you said you were going to town for supplies, not to collect strays. Buck's eyes fixed on Elena and Maria with obvious confusion. Elena felt her stomach drop. James hadn't told his partner about them. This was where the kindness would end, where reality would crash back down on them like a rock slide. But James simply climbed down from the wagon and began unloading their few possessions. Buck, meet Elena Martinez and her daughter Maria. They'll be staying with us for a while. Staying with us? Buck sputtered. McKenzie, we never talked about... We're talking about it now. James cut him off, his voice carrying a warning tone Elena hadn't heard before. Elena's going to help with the cooking and housework. Lord knows we need it. Buck looked from James to Elena and back again, clearly trying to figure out what was really going on. Elena could practically see the wheels turning in his head as he came to the obvious conclusion about why a single woman with a child would be living at a bachelor ranch. I see, Buck said slowly, a knowing smirk spreading across his face. Well then, welcome to the Rocking M Ranch, Miss Martinez. The way he said it made Elena's skin crawl. She could tell that Buck thought she was James's woman, bought and paid for. The shame she had managed to push down came flooding back. Actually, James said, his voice dangerously quiet, it's Mrs. Martinez. She's a widow. Buck's smirk faltered slightly, but didn't disappear entirely. Elena realized she would have to prove herself to this man, show him she was here to work and not for the reasons he obviously suspected. James helped Elena and Maria down from the wagon. Let me show you the cabin, he said, leading them toward a smaller building behind the main house. It's not much, but it's private and clean. The cabin was indeed small. Just 2 rooms with a tiny fireplace and a single window. But it was more space than Elena and Maria had called their own in months. Better yet, it had a real bed with clean sheets and a table with 2 chairs. The well's right outside, James said, pointing through the window. Pump works fine. There's a root cellar out back where we keep the preserved food. You're welcome to anything in there. Elena set Maria down, and the little girl immediately began exploring their new home. It's like a dollhouse, Mama, she said, running her hands along the smooth wooden walls. Mr. McKenzie, Elena said quietly, your partner doesn't seem happy about us being here. James rubbed the back of his neck, looking uncomfortable. Buck's a good man, but he's got some fixed ideas about things. He'll come around once he sees what a good worker you are. Elena wasn't so sure about that. She had seen the look in Buck's eyes, the same look she had gotten from other men in Tombstone. The look that said he thought he knew exactly what she was and why she was here. There's something else, James continued. Tomorrow's Saturday. Buck and I usually go into town for supplies and, well, to blow off steam. You and Maria should probably stay here. Some of the men in town might get the wrong idea if they see you living out here with us. Elena's heart sank. She was a prisoner again, just in a prettier cage this time. For how long? Just until people get used to the idea, James said quickly. Maybe a few weeks. I know it's not fair, but folks in Tombstone like to talk. As if to prove his point, the sound of approaching horses came from outside. Elena peered through the window and saw 3 riders approaching the ranch. Even from a distance, she could see the glint of badges on their chests. Lawmen, she whispered, her blood turning to ice. James moved to the window and cursed under his breath. That's Sheriff Crenshaw and his deputies. They must have followed us. Elena grabbed Maria and pulled her close. What do they want? I don't know, James said, but his face had gone pale. Stay inside. Don't let them see you. As James walked out to meet the approaching riders, Elena pressed herself against the wall beside the window, where she could hear, but not be seen. Her heart pounded so hard, she thought it might wake the dead. Whatever Sheriff Crenshaw wanted, Elena was certain it wasn't good news for her and Maria. In her experience, lawmen in mining towns were usually more interested in keeping the peace with the men who had money than protecting women and children who didn't. She held Maria tight and waited to see if their brief taste of safety was about to come to an end. Afternoon, Sheriff, James called out, his hand resting casually on his hip near his gun as Crenshaw and his 2 deputies rode into the ranch yard. What brings you all the way out here? Elena crouched beside the cabin window, holding Maria close and trying to keep her own breathing quiet enough to hear what was happening outside. Through the glass, she could see Buck standing on the main house porch, his face confused but alert. Sheriff Crenshaw was a big man with a thick mustache and the kind of belly that came from too much beer and not enough hard work. His deputies, Tom Rivers and young Billy Santos, flanked him like hunting dogs waiting for orders. "Mackenzie," Crenshaw said, dismounting slowly and dusting off his pants. "We need to have ourselves a talk about that woman you took out of town this morning." "What woman would that be?" James asked, though Elena could hear the tension creeping into his voice. "Don't play dumb with me, Cowboy." Crenshaw laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Half of Tombstone saw you loading up that Mexican gal and her kid. Elena Martinez, ain't that right?" Elena's stomach dropped. How did Crenshaw know her name? She had been careful to keep a low profile in town, never staying in one place too long, never causing trouble. "Mrs. Martinez is helping out around the ranch," James said evenly. "Don't see how that's anyone's business but mine." Deputy Rivers spat a stream of tobacco juice into the dirt. "It's our business when known prostitutes start setting up shop outside town limits. We got decent families to think about." The word hit Elena like a physical blow. Prostitute. That's what they thought she was. That's what everyone would think now. She pressed her hand over Maria's ears, hoping her daughter wouldn't understand what was being said. "You better watch your mouth, Rivers." James's voice had gone deadly quiet. "Mrs. Martinez is a respectable widow trying to make an honest living." "Respectable?" Crenshaw laughed again. "Boy, you must be greener than I thought. That woman was soliciting men outside the Last Chance just yesterday. I got 3 witnesses who heard her offer herself for the price of a meal." Elena closed her eyes, feeling her carefully built new world crumbling around her. She had been so desperate, so scared for Maria, that she hadn't thought about who might be watching, who might be listening. "Even if that were true," James said, "which I don't believe for a second, what's it matter? She's not soliciting anyone now, ain't she?" Deputy Santos spoke up for the first time. He was younger than the others, maybe 25, with the eager cruelty of a man trying to prove himself. "How do we know she ain't plying her trade right here on your ranch?" Buck stepped down from the porch, his face red with anger. "Now you hold on just a minute. Stay out of this, Collins," Crenshaw warned. "This is between me and your partner." Through the window, Elena watched James's shoulders tense. She could see him fighting to keep his temper under control, knowing that losing it would only make things worse. "What exactly are you accusing me of, Sheriff?" James asked. "I ain't accusing you of nothing yet," Crenshaw replied. "But I am telling you that harboring a known prostitute is against territorial law, especially when there's a child involved." At the mention of Maria, Elena felt something cold and sharp twist in her chest. They weren't just threatening her, they were threatening her daughter. "What's that supposed to mean?" James demanded. "Means that little girl ought to be in the care of decent Christian folks," Deputy Rivers said, "not living in sin with her whore mother." This time James did move, taking a step toward the deputy with his hand moving toward his gun. "Say that again, Rivers. I dare you." "James," Buck called out, moving to his partner's side. "Don't let them goad you into something stupid." Elena knew she had to act. If James drew his gun on a sheriff and his deputies, he would either end up dead or in prison. Either way, she and Maria would be left with no protection at all. She stood up, her legs shaking, and walked to the cabin door. "Maria, stay inside no matter what happens," she whispered to her daughter. "Hide under the bed if anyone comes in." Maria's eyes went wide with fear. "Mama, don't go out there." "I have to, mija. Stay here." Elena stepped out of the cabin and walked toward the group of men, her chin raised despite the terror coursing through her veins. Every eye turned to her as she approached. "Sheriff Crenshaw," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "I understand you want to speak with me." Crenshaw's mustache twitched in what might have been a smile. "Well now, there's the lady of the hour. Thought you might want to hide inside and let your man do the talking for you." "Mr. McKenzie is not my man," Elena said clearly. "He offered me honest work, and I accepted. There's nothing more to it than that." "Honest work?" Rivers snorted. "Lady, we all know what kind of work you do. Question is, how much you charging out here where there ain't no competition?" Elena felt her face burn with shame, but she forced herself to meet the deputy's mocking gaze. "I cook, I clean, I mend clothes. That's the only work I do for Mr. McKenzie, or anyone else. And I suppose what happened at the Last Chance yesterday was just my imagination?" Crenshaw asked. Elena's throat went dry. There was no point in denying what they had all heard. "I was desperate. My daughter was starving. I would have done anything to feed her. But you didn't have to, did you? James spoke up, moving to stand beside Elena. Because I gave you and Maria a meal with no strings attached. Crenshaw studied them both for a long moment, his small eyes calculating. Elena could practically see him weighing his options, trying to decide how much trouble it was worth to pursue this. Here's what's going to happen, the sheriff finally said. Miss Martinez, you're going to pack up your things and come back to town with us. There's a family there, the Hendersons, who might be willing to take in your daughter if she behaves herself. No, the word exploded from Elena before she could stop it. You can't take my daughter from me. I can and I will if I think she's in moral danger, Crenshaw replied coldly, and living out here with unmarried men definitely qualifies. Elena felt the world tilting around her. Everything was happening too fast, spinning out of control just like it had when her husband died. Just when she thought she had found safety, it was being ripped away again. She's not going anywhere, James said, his voice like steel. And neither is her daughter. Mackenzie, Crenshaw warned, don't make this harder than it has to be. You seem like a decent enough fellow. Don't throw your life away over some Mexican whore and her bastard kid. The silence that followed was so complete that Elena could hear her own heartbeat. She watched James's face, waiting for the moment when he would realize that protecting her wasn't worth the cost. When he would step aside and let Crenshaw take her and Maria away. But James didn't step aside. Instead, he moved closer to Elena, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Sheriff, James said, his voice carrying a dangerous edge, I think you and your boys better ride on back to town now, before someone says something they'll regret. Crenshaw's hand dropped to his gun butt. Is that a threat, Mackenzie? It's friendly advice, James replied. But if you want to take it as a threat, that's your choice. The tension stretched between them like a wire about to snap. Elena held her breath, knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether she and Maria had any future at all. Lightning cracked across the sky as James McKenzie's hand hovered inches from his gun, facing down 3 armed lawmen who wanted to destroy the only family he'd found in years. The storm that had been building all week finally unleashed its fury, sending the first fat raindrops spattering into the dust between the two groups of men. Last chance, Mackenzie, Sheriff Crenshaw called over the rising wind. Step aside and let us take the woman, or face the consequences. Elena felt Maria's small hand slip into hers as her daughter appeared beside her. Despite being told to stay hidden, the little girl's dark eyes were wide with fear, but she pressed close to her mother's side with the fierce loyalty of a child who had learned early that family was all that mattered. Nobody's taking anybody anywhere, Buck Collins announced, stepping down from the porch with his own gun now visible on his hip. Elena was shocked to see James's partner supporting them. She had been certain Buck wanted them gone. Deputy Rivers laughed nervously. Collins, you're making a big mistake. When word gets back to town that you're harboring a what? Buck's voice cut through the air like a whip. A woman trying to feed her child? A mother who's willing to work honest for honest pay? He spat into the dirt. Maybe you boys should think about what kind of men you're being right now. The wind picked up, sending tumbleweeds bouncing across the ranch yard like nature's own cavalry charge. Elena's hair whipped around her face as she watched the standoff unfold. She could feel the electricity in the air, not just from the storm, but from the tension crackling between the men. Young Deputy Santos shifted uncomfortably in his saddle. Sheriff, maybe we should— Shut up, Billy, Crenshaw snapped. I'm handling this. But Elena could see doubt creeping into the young deputy's eyes. Santos kept glancing at Maria, and each time he looked at the frightened child, his resolve seemed to weaken a little more. You know what I think, James said, suddenly taking a step forward. I think you boys rode out here on some half-baked story because you don't have anything better to do. What exactly did these witnesses of yours say they heard? Crenshaw's mustache twitched. They heard her propositioning men for money. Did they? James pressed. Or did they hear a desperate mother begging for food for her child? Because there's a big difference between the two. Elena watched as uncertainty flickered across Deputy Rivers' face. She realized that maybe the witnesses hadn't been as clear about what they'd heard as Crenshaw was claiming. Thunder rolled across the sky like God's own judgment, and the rain began falling harder. The horses started dancing nervously, spooked by the sudden downpour. Look, Buck called out, having to raise his voice over the storm. Why don't you boys head back to town before this gets any worse? We can sort this out when the weather clears. We're not going anywhere without, Crenshaw started. But his words were cut off by a brilliant flash of lightning, followed immediately by a deafening crack of thunder. All the horses reared at once, their riders fighting to stay in the saddle. Deputy Santos's mount spun in a complete circle, nearly throwing him to the ground. In the chaos, Elena saw her chance. "Maria, run to the barn!" she shouted over the storm. But instead of running away, Maria stepped forward and tugged on Elena's dress. "Mama," she said in her clear, carrying voice, "why are the bad men trying to take us away from Mr. James?" The innocence in the child's question seemed to hit everyone like a physical blow. Deputy Santos actually winced. Even Rivers looked uncomfortable. "We're not bad men, little girl," Santos said gently, trying to control his spooked horse. "We're just trying to make sure you're safe." "I am safe," Maria replied with the absolute certainty of a child. "Mr. James and Mr. Buck take care of us. They give us food and a warm bed, and Mr. James is teaching me to read." Elena's heart swelled with pride at her daughter's courage, even as terror continued to claw at her chest. Maria was defending their new life with the fearless honesty that only children possessed. "Reading's important," Santos agreed, his voice softer now. He looked at Sheriff Crenshaw. "Maybe the kid's better off here than—" "Shut your mouth, Santos," Crenshaw roared. "I don't want to hear another word from any of you." The sheriff's fury seemed to break the spell that Maria's words had cast. But Elena noticed that something had changed in the dynamic between the lawmen. Santos was no longer looking at Crenshaw with respect. Now there was something that looked almost like disgust in his young eyes. The rain was coming down in sheets now, turning the ranch yard into a muddy mess. The horses were increasingly difficult to control, and all the men were soaked through their clothes. "Sheriff," Rivers called out, wiping water from his eyes, "maybe we should head back. We can deal with this tomorrow when—" "No." Crenshaw's voice was nearly lost in the storm. "We finish this now." But even as he spoke, another flash of lightning lit up the sky. And this time it was followed by the sound of splintering wood. A massive cottonwood tree at the edge of the property swayed dangerously, its roots loosened by the sudden downpour. "Tree's coming down," Buck shouted. Everyone looked up to see the giant tree tilting slowly toward the ranch buildings. It was a magnificent specimen, probably 100 years old. But the combination of saturated soil and fierce winds was too much for its ancient roots. "It's going to hit the main house," James yelled. In that moment, all thoughts of their standoff vanished. The tree was falling in slow motion, like a giant's club swinging down toward the building where James and Buck lived. If it hit the house, it would likely crush half the structure. "Santos, Rivers, help me get these horses clear," Buck commanded, temporarily taking charge of the situation. Years of working livestock had taught him to think fast in emergencies. But Elena wasn't watching the tree or the panicking horses. She was watching Sheriff Crenshaw, and what she saw chilled her more than the cold rain. The man was smiling, actually smiling, as he watched the tree fall toward the house that sheltered the people who had defied him. The cottonwood hit the ground with a crash that shook the earth beneath their feet. Branches and debris flew in all directions. When the dust and leaves settled, Elena could see that the massive trunk had missed the main house by less than 10 feet, but it had completely crushed the small shed where James kept his tools and equipment. In the sudden quiet that followed the crash, with rain still drumming on the fallen tree's leaves, Sheriff Crenshaw's voice rang out clear and cold. "Shame about that tree," he said, his eyes fixed on James. "Lot of dangerous things can happen to folks who don't know their place." The threat was unmistakable. Elena felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rain soaking through her clothes. Crenshaw wasn't just after her. He was willing to hurt James and Buck too, maybe even destroy their ranch, to get what he wanted. "You threatening us, Sheriff?" James asked, his hand moving back toward his gun despite the chaos around them. "Just making an observation," Crenshaw replied with that same cold smile. "Weather can be real unpredictable. Never know what might happen next." Elena realized with growing horror that this man wouldn't stop. He would keep coming back, keep finding ways to threaten them, until he got what he wanted. And what he wanted was to destroy any chance she had of building a decent life for Maria. The storm raged on around them, but Elena knew the real tempest was just beginning. "Pack your things," Elena whispered to Maria as dawn broke gray and cold over the ranch the morning after the storm. "We have to leave before they come back." She had lain awake all night, listening to every sound, jumping at every creak of the cabin walls. Sheriff Crenshaw's threat echoed in her mind like a curse. The fallen tree served as a constant reminder of how much damage angry men could do when they set their minds to it. Maria looked up from the wooden horse James had carved for her, confusion clouding her small features. "But Mama, this is our home now." Elena's heart broke a little more. For 3 precious days, Maria had felt safe and happy. Now Elena had to destroy that safety to protect her daughter from something even worse. "Sometimes we have to leave places we like," Elena said gently, folding their few clothes into the old flour sack that served as their luggage. "Remember how we left Tucson? And Phoenix before that?" But even as she spoke, Elena knew this was different. In those other places, they had been running from poverty and hunger. Here, they were running from something that felt like hope, and that made it so much harder to bear. A soft knock on the cabin door made Elena's blood freeze. She grabbed Maria and pushed her behind the bed, then picked up the iron poker from beside the fireplace. "Elena? It's James. Can I come in?" Relief flooded through her so quickly it made her dizzy. She opened the door to find James standing on the small porch, his hat in his hands and worry written across his weather-beaten face. "We need to talk," he said quietly. Elena let him in, noticing how he had to duck slightly to clear the low doorframe. In the small cabin, he seemed even taller and broader than usual. Maria peeked out from behind the bed, and James smiled at her. "Morning, little bit. Sleep okay after all that thunder?" "Mr. James," Maria said, climbing back onto the bed. "Mama says we have to go away, but I don't want to leave you and Mr. Buck." James's eyes moved to the packed flour sack on the table, then back to Elena's face. "Running away won't solve this. It's the only thing that will keep you safe," Elena replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Sheriff Crenshaw made it clear what he's willing to do. I won't have your ranch destroyed because of me." "This is my ranch," James said firmly. "My choice who lives on it." Elena shook her head. "You don't understand. Men like Crenshaw don't give up. He'll find ways to hurt you, to drive away your business, to make your life hell until you give him what he wants." James sat down heavily in one of the cabin's 2 chairs, suddenly looking older than his years. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you. Something about why I really came to Arizona territory." Elena felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. Here it comes, she thought. The real story. The reason behind his kindness that was too good to be true. "I told you I was looking for my sister Catherine," James continued. "That was true. But I didn't tell you why she ran away." Maria had gone back to playing with her wooden horse, humming softly to herself. Elena envied her daughter's ability to find joy even in the midst of uncertainty. "Catherine was 16 when she got pregnant," James said, his voice barely above a whisper. "The father was the son of the richest man in our county back in Montana. When Catherine told him about the baby, he laughed in her face, called her a lying whore, and said he'd never touched trash like her." Elena's hands clenched into fists. She had heard similar stories too many times. Powerful men using women, and then destroying them when the consequences became inconvenient. "My father threw Catherine out," James continued, pain raw in his voice. "Said she had brought shame on the family name. I was only 18, working cattle 16 hours a day, and I didn't stand up for her the way I should have." Now Elena understood. James saw himself in this situation, a chance to do what he hadn't been able to do for his sister. "Catherine died having that baby in a charity hospital in San Francisco," James said. "Alone, with no family, no money, nothing. I got word 2 weeks after she was buried." "I'm sorry," Elena said softly, and she meant it. The pain in James's eyes was real and deep. "When I saw you in Tombstone, desperate enough to..." He paused, searching for the right words. "All I could think was that Catherine might have been in that same position, might have had to make that same terrible choice just to survive." Elena sat down across from him, Maria's humming providing a gentle soundtrack to their conversation. "That doesn't change what's happening now. Crenshaw will destroy you if I stay." "Maybe," James agreed. "Or maybe he's not as powerful as he wants us to think." Before Elena could ask what he meant, the sound of approaching horses made them both tense. But this time, it wasn't the sheriff. Through the window, Elena could see Buck riding toward the cabin with a stranger, a tall, well-dressed man on a fine black horse. "Who is that?" Elena asked. James looked out the window and his face brightened for the first time since yesterday's confrontation. That would be Judge Harrison from the Territorial Court in Prescott. Sent him a telegram last night. Elena's confusion must have shown on her face, because James smiled grimly. Turns out, Sheriff Crenshaw has been running his own little kingdom here in Tombstone for quite a while, making his own laws, taking bribes from the mining companies, harassing people who don't pay him enough respect. The territorial government's been getting complaints. Hope fluttered in Elena's chest like a caged bird, but she was afraid to let it fly free. You think this judge will help us? I think Judge Harrison is very interested in hearing about a sheriff who threatens to destroy people's property and tries to steal children from their mothers without proper legal authority. Buck and the judge had dismounted and were walking toward the cabin. Elena could see that the stranger was indeed wearing the black robes of a territorial judge under his traveling coat. There's something else, James said quickly, before the men reached the door. Elena, I know this is sudden, and I know you have every reason not to trust men's promises. But I've been thinking, if you were my wife, Crenshaw couldn't touch you or Maria. A man's family is his own business, and even corrupt sheriffs have to respect that. Elena's world tilted sideways. Are you proposing to me? I'm proposing a solution, James said carefully. Marriage would give you legal protection. Give Maria a father's name. Make you part of a family that Crenshaw can't break apart. Before Elena could respond, Buck's voice called out from outside. James, you in there? Judge Harrison wants to hear everyone's side of this story. Elena looked at Maria, still playing contentedly with her carved horse, blissfully unaware that her entire future hung in the balance. Then she looked at James, this unexpected man who had appeared in their lives like an answer to a prayer she hadn't dared to pray. Why? She whispered. Why would you do that for us? James stood up and moved toward the door, then paused with his hand on the latch. Because everyone deserves a chance to start over. Because Catherine never got that chance. And because... He turned back to her, and Elena saw something in his gray eyes that made her breath catch. Because in these few days, you and Maria have made this place feel more like home than it has since I built it. The knock on the door came again, more insistent this time. Elena knew that when she opened that door, she would be stepping into a future she couldn't predict. But for the first time since her husband's death, that future didn't look like just surviving from one day to the next. It looked like something that might actually be worth living. Sheriff Crenshaw, you are under arrest for abuse of power and corruption of office. Judge Harrison's voice rang out across Tombstone's main street, like a church bell calling sinners to judgment. The territorial judge had wasted no time after hearing Elena's story. By noon, he was marching down the dusty road with 2 federal marshals flanking him. Elena watched from the boardwalk outside the general store, her heart pounding as the scene unfolded before her. She had never imagined she would see the day when someone like Crenshaw would face consequences for his actions. The sheriff stood frozen outside his office, his face cycling through shock, anger, and something that looked almost like fear. Judge Harrison, I don't know what lies you've been told, but no lies, Sheriff. Just testimony from multiple witnesses about your threats, your attempts to separate a child from her mother without legal cause, and your history of taking bribes from the Copper Crown Mining Company. Judge Harrison held up a thick folder of papers. The territorial government has been building a case against you for months. Elena felt James's hand find hers as they watched Crenshaw's world crumble around him. The corrupt sheriff's eyes swept the gathering crowd, looking for support that wasn't there. Even his own deputies kept their distance, suddenly very interested in studying their boots. You can't prove any of that, Crenshaw sputtered, but his voice lacked its usual commanding tone. Actually, we can, said Federal Marshal Kate Sullivan, stepping forward. Elena was surprised to see that one of the marshals was a woman, tall, confident, with steel-gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. Deputy Santos came forward this morning with quite a story about yesterday's incident at the McKenzie ranch. Young Billy Santos appeared from behind the jail, his face pale but determined. I'm sorry, Sheriff. I can't be part of this anymore. Elena watched as Crenshaw's face turned red with rage. You backstabbing little... That's enough. Marshal Sullivan cut him off. William Crenshaw, you're coming with us to Prescott to face territorial charges. As the federal marshals led Crenshaw away in handcuffs, Elena felt a weight lift from her shoulders that she hadn't even realized she was carrying. For months, she had lived with the constant fear that men with power could destroy her life on a whim. Now, for the first time, she was seeing that sometimes justice actually won. "It's over," James said quietly, squeezing her hand. But Elena knew it wasn't completely over. There was still the matter of his proposal from that morning. Words that hung between them like morning mist, beautiful but uncertain. "Mama!" Maria came running from the schoolhouse where Elena had left her with the teacher during all the excitement. "Miss Peters says I can come to school every day if we stay in Tombstone." Elena's heart clenched. The schoolteacher had examined Maria and declared her bright and eager to learn. It was everything Elena had dreamed of for her daughter: education, opportunity, a real future. But it meant staying in a town where everyone knew her story, where whispers would follow them wherever they went. "We'll see, mija," Elena said carefully. James knelt down to Maria's level. "What did you think of school?" "I love it," Maria bubbled with excitement. "Miss Peters has books with pictures, and she's teaching me to write my letters. And there's a girl named Lucy who wants to be my friend." Elena watched James's face as he listened to Maria's chatter. The tender expression in his eyes made something warm and dangerous bloom in her chest. This man genuinely cared about her daughter's happiness, not as a burden to be tolerated, but as a child deserving of love and dreams. "Mr. James," Maria said suddenly, "are you going to marry my mama?" Elena's cheeks burned with embarrassment. "Maria, that's not something you ask." "Actually," James said, standing up and turning to face Elena, "that's exactly what I'm hoping to do, if your mama will have me." The proposal, spoken in broad daylight in front of half the town, hit Elena like a lightning bolt. Around them, people were still talking about Crenshaw's arrest, but she barely heard their voices. All she could focus on was James's steady gray gaze and the question hanging in the air between them. "James," she said quietly, "you don't have to do this anymore. Crenshaw is gone. The danger is past." "This isn't about Crenshaw," James replied. "This is about you, me, and Maria becoming a real family. Not for protection, not for convenience, but because." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "Because I love you, Elena. Both of you." The words hit her like a physical blow. Love. When was the last time someone had said they loved her? Her husband had, before the mine took him. But that felt like a lifetime ago. Like something that had happened to a different woman. "You barely know me," Elena whispered. "I know you're brave enough to do anything for your daughter. I know you work harder than any 3 men I've met. I know you make the best coffee this side of San Antonio. And you sing Spanish lullabies while you cook that make my heart ache in the best possible way." James's voice was soft but certain. "And I know that these past few days with you and Maria have been the happiest I've had since Catherine died." Elena felt tears prick her eyes. Part of her wanted to say yes immediately, to grab onto this chance for happiness with both hands. But another part of her, the part that had learned to be careful, whispered warnings about moving too fast, trusting too much. "What if it doesn't work?" she asked. "What if you decide you made a mistake? Then we'll figure it out together," James said simply. "That's what married people do." Maria tugged on Elena's skirt. "Mama, I want Mr. James to be my papa. He teaches me things, and he makes you smile." Out of the mouths of babes, Elena thought. Her daughter had seen what Elena was only beginning to admit to herself, that James McKenzie made her feel like a woman worth caring about, not just a burden to be endured. "Yes," she said, the word coming out as barely more than a breath. "Yes?" James's face lit up like sunrise. "Yes," Elena repeated, stronger this time. "I'll marry you, James McKenzie." The cheer that went up from the gathered townspeople made Elena laugh despite her tears. Even in Tombstone, Arizona territory, people loved a good love story. But as James pulled her into his arms for their first real kiss, Elena realized that this wasn't just a story anymore. This was her life, finally beginning again. 2 years later, Elena McKenzie stood on the porch of her home, their home, watching the Arizona sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson. The Rocking M Ranch had grown considerably, with new corrals, an expanded barn, and a proper garden that provided vegetables for 3 neighboring families. More importantly, the little cabin behind the main house had been transformed into a schoolroom, where Elena taught reading and writing to the ranch children and any youngsters from town, whose parents could spare them for a few hours each week. "Mama Elena, Papa James says dinner's ready." The voice belonged to 7-year-old Lucy Santos. Yes, the same Deputy Santos who had found his courage that day 2 years ago. He had left law enforcement after Crenshaw's arrest and now worked as the ranch foreman, bringing his wife and daughter to live in the foreman's cottage James had built. "Tell Papa I'll be right there," Elena called back, still marveling at how natural the word Papa sounded when applied to James. He had legally adopted Maria 6 months after their wedding, giving her his name and all the security that came with it. Elena placed her hand on her rounded belly, where their second child grew strong and healthy. This baby had been a surprise, a wonderful, terrifying surprise that filled Elena with joy she had never thought possible. Deep in thought, James appeared beside her, slipping his arm around her waist and resting his hand over hers on her belly. "Just remembering," Elena said, leaning into his warmth. "2 years ago, I stood in an alley behind the Last Chance saloon, ready to do anything for a scrap of food for Maria. Now look at us." James pressed a kiss to her temple. "Now look at us," he agreed. "A proper family with a ranch, a school, and another little one on the way." Through the window, Elena could see Maria, now 8 and reading at a level that amazed everyone, helping Lucy set the table for dinner. The two girls had become inseparable friends, chattering in the mixture of Spanish and English that had become the common language of their expanding household. "Buck's threatening to move out if we add any more people to this place," James said with a chuckle. His partner had been grumbling for months about the ranch turning into a boarding house for strays. But Elena noticed he always made sure there was an extra place at the table whenever someone in need showed up. "Speaking of Buck," Elena said, "has he written to that woman in Tucson yet?" James grinned. "Finally sent the letter yesterday. Took him 6 months to work up the courage." Elena smiled. Even confirmed bachelors like Buck Collins sometimes found that love could sneak up on them when they least expected it. A rider appeared on the horizon, silhouetted against the setting sun. Elena tensed automatically. Old habits died hard, but James squeezed her shoulder reassuringly. "It's just Doc Martinez from town," he said, "probably coming to check on you and the baby." As the doctor approached, Elena reflected on how much her relationship with the town had changed. At first, there had been whispers and sideways glances. But gradually, as people saw her working in the school, helping at church functions, and simply living as a respectable married woman, the gossip had faded. It helped that Judge Harrison had made it very clear to everyone that Elena McKenzie was under the protection of territorial law, and anyone who harassed her would answer to federal authorities. "Evening, folks," Doc Martinez called out as he dismounted. "How's our expectant mother feeling?" "Like I'm carrying a future rodeo champion," Elena replied, rubbing her back. "This one kicks harder than Maria ever did." "Could be a boy this time," the doctor said with a wink. "They say boys are more active in the womb." Elena and James exchanged glances. They had talked about what they would name a son, finally settling on Gabriel, after Elena's father, who had been a gentleman with calloused hands and dreams bigger than his circumstances. After Doc Martinez finished his examination and pronounced both mother and baby healthy, the 3 adults sat on the porch, enjoying the cool evening air. "Any word from Judge Harrison about the new territorial school funding?" Elena asked. "Matter of fact, yes," Doc Martinez replied. "Your proposal for a regional school here at the ranch was approved. Starting next fall, you'll have official territorial support and funding for 20 students." Elena felt tears of joy spring to her eyes. Her dream of providing education to children who couldn't afford to travel to larger towns was becoming reality. James had supported the idea from the beginning, even offering to build a proper schoolhouse on their land. "There's more," the doctor continued. "They want you to train other teachers. Seems word has gotten out about your methods, and other communities want to start similar programs." Elena looked at James, seeing pride and love shining in his gray eyes. When she had first met him, she had been ready to sell herself for the price of a meal. Now she was being asked to help shape the future of education in Arizona territory. "What do you think?" she asked her husband. "I think," James said slowly, "that you're going to change a lot of lives for the better, just like you changed mine." As night settled over the ranch, Elena listened to the sounds of their life together. Maria and Lucy giggling in the main house, Buck arguing with the chickens as he secured the coop, the gentle lowing of cattle in the distance. It was a symphony of ordinary moments that added up to something extraordinary. 2 years ago, she had been willing to sacrifice everything for her daughter's survival. She had learned that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in what you were willing to lose, but in what you were brave enough to accept. Love, security, respect, a future filled with possibilities. All the things she had thought were beyond her reach. Now, as James helped her to her feet and they walked hand in hand toward their home, Elena understood that the best bargains in life couldn't be negotiated or earned. They could only be recognized when they appeared, and embraced with the full knowledge that some gifts were simply too precious to question. "Ready for dinner, Mrs. McKenzie?" James asked, holding the door open for her. "Ready for everything, Mr. McKenzie?" Elena replied, and meant it with every fiber of her being.